In this video, I'm going to show you how we heat our office with Bitcoin. And yes, you heard me right. We heat our office with Bitcoin. And you might be thinking, what are you talking about? How are you heating your office with Bitcoin? I barely understood Bitcoin before, but now I'm even more confused. Don't worry, because by the end of this video, it will all make sense. And if you're not familiar with Bitcoin or cryptocurrency and how it works, that is a very long discussion and takes more time than I have in this video. But there is a great movie that I recommend you watch on Amazon, and it's called Cryptopia. This explains the blockchain and the concept behind crypto in a very easy to understand way, and I recommend it for anyone that is interested in learning more about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and I will link that video in the description below so you can check it out for yourself later. And lastly, before we get started, please make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. It takes a lot of time and energy to put out content like this, and liking this video and subscribing to the channel is a free way you can support the channel, and it is much appreciated. So that being said, let's dive in. So this video is going to be broken down into 3 sections. Now, first, I'm going to briefly explain where we get the heat from the Bitcoin. The second part we're going to explain is how we take that heat and use it to heat our office. And in part 3, I'll show you the actual equipment we use to transfer the heat and how it works so you can see our office Bitcoin powered heater in action. So first off, let's talk about where we get this Bitcoin heat from. Now, in case you're wondering if I have my Coinbase account hooked up to my furnace by some magic adapter and I am magically powering my furnace with Bitcoin, that is not what's happening. What's actually happening is we are heating our office with the heat that is produced by mining Bitcoin. And if you're wondering what a Bitcoin miner is and what it looks like, don't worry, I'll show you that a little bit later in the video. Now, if you are not familiar with how Bitcoin mining works, that's why I recommended you watch Cryptopia, because it explains the blockchain and Bitcoin and why it's a revolutionary technology. And it also explains briefly how mining works. So I'm only going to touch on that for a moment before we go further. And essentially what is happening when we are mining Bitcoin is that we are processing Bitcoin transactions on the blockchain and getting paid for doing this with Bitcoin. Now, in a nutshell, this is the algorithm and this is how Bitcoin works. Miners like me are the people that are providing the processing power to the network and processing Bitcoin transaction. And as a thank you, the Bitcoin network pays us out in Bitcoin. Now, that's the TLDR version, so I'm not going to go into mining pools versus block reward transactions because it's very complex, but if you want to know how it actually works, again, I recommend you watch Cryptopia for a clearer understanding. Now, this is just one example of what a Bitcoin miner looks like. This is what's called an ASIC miner, which stands for Application Specific Integrated Circuit. This is where we get the heat to heat our office, but it's not how you think. We don't just place these all over the office like space heaters, and all of my crypto miners that are watching us know why, and that's because these are loud as and in case you're wondering what one sounds like when it's running, I'm going to show you that shortly so you can see why that is not how we heat the office. If we had these plugged in all over the office, we wouldn't be able to hear ourselves think. Now, as you can see, having miners plugged in like that all over the office would not be practical and would be quite annoying. So the way we harness the heat energy coming off of these miners is through a process called liquid cooling. And when I show you what liquid cooling looks like, your head will almost explode. This stuff is so cool. But before I do that, I want to show you what a flat plate heat exchanger looks like, because the flat plate heat exchanger is how we harness the heat from these miners and repurpose that heat to heat our office. So this is a flat plate heat exchanger, and the way this works is that you have 2 separate hydronics loops going through each of the flat plates. Now, each loop is isolated, and all that is happening is the heat from the warm liquid going through one side is being transferred to the hydronic fluid on the other side of the flat plate. Now, this is a used flat plate heat exchanger that came off of a snowmelt system, and we are just using it for demonstration purposes so that you can visualize it. These are also used in hot water applications as well, but essentially all a flat plate heat exchanger does is absorb heat out of liquid and transfer it from that liquid to the other side of the flat plate in a second isolated loop. And if you're still confused, no worries. Let's go take a look at the liquid cooling rack, and it should start to make sense here shortly. So this is a Bitcoin miner liquid cooling rack, and what I'm about to show you might defy everything you thought you knew about electronics. And what we are looking at is those ASIC miners. Now, first off, don't worry, these are not submerged in water. These are actually submerged in a dielectric fluid. And what that means is that this fluid is non-conductive, which means it doesn't conduct electricity. And that is why the electronics are not short-circuiting right now. Now, this fluid serves a purpose of absorbing heat. And what is happening is that this dielectric fluid is actually being circulated through a flat plate heat exchanger, just like the one I just showed you. And the fluid on the secondary loop of that flat plate heat exchanger is our hydronics loop, and that is what's carrying heat to the office. So in a nutshell, what is happening is that these miners are putting out a large amount of heat, which is then being absorbed by the dielectric fluid, and that dielectric fluid is then circulating to a flat plate heat exchanger and is transferring the heat to our secondary loop. Now, the reason our miners are set up this way is primarily to mine Bitcoin in a way that is more effective at cooling the equipment down and also much quieter. Because these miners are submerged in fluid, there's no noisy air-cooled fans running at 70 or 80 decibels, and it actually does a better job of cooling the miners and keeps them in better shape with less dust and contaminants than what is normally present in the air. And this way, the way we use the heat and repurpose it to heat our office is what's going on behind this mining rack, which I'll show you now. And this is part 3, and this is the secondary hydronics loop. Now, remember that flat plate heat exchanger I just showed you? Well, the other side of that loop is right here, and that is circulating the fluid off of that heat exchanger, and that is the fluid that is circulating through these pipes here. And we have these pipes running through a forced air hydronics coil that is inside an air handler that serves two purposes. Now, number one is that it is cooling down the Bitcoin miners by cooling off that fluid, and number two is that it is heating our shop with the heat that is coming out of that fluid. So right now, let's go take a look at one of these hydronics coils, and then lastly, I'll show you the air handler with the hydronics coil, and you can see the Bitcoin heating in action for yourself. So this is a forced air hydronics coil, and as you can see, this looks similar to a radiator on a car, for example, and essentially it serves the same purpose. In a nutshell, you have hot fluid coming in and colder fluid coming out, and you have a fan that is blowing air across the coil. Now, the air coming across the coil does two things. Number one, it cools down the fluid, which simultaneously transfers heat from fluid to the air. And this is why if you ever stand in front of your car on a hot day, for example, and feel the radiator fan kick on, you can feel all of the heat coming out of the radiator fluid when that fan kicks on. Now, the same principle is going on here, it's just a different application. So now that you know what a forced air hydronics coil is and what a flat plate heat exchanger is, and we've shown you where we're getting the Bitcoin heat from, the final step is to show you our Bitcoin heater in action. But before we do that, if you haven't done so already, please make sure you're subscribed to the channel and smash that like button. So right now we are at one of the air handlers in our shop. The forced air hydronics coil I showed you is sitting inside this metal plenum right here, and this is where it's being fed by a supply and return pipe coming from the secondary hydronics loop that is coming off of our liquid cooling mining rack. And as you can see, the hydraulic fluid is entering here and it is exiting here, and as a result we have some nice warm heat from our Bitcoin miners being transferred to this coil, which is making sure our shop stays nice and toasty. And that is how we heat our office with Bitcoin. Thank you for tuning in, and if you enjoyed this video, let us know what you think in the comment section below. We read all the comments and appreciate all your feedback and taking the time to watch. So for more dope videos on how you can get the best HVAC for your home and stay up to date on the latest heating and air conditioning trends, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and watch this next video.